process, but as they went through it, OFM and the governor's office got more and more impressed with what's been happening here, and then it was actually pretty straightforward after that. OFM was a larger hurdle than the legislature. Just really appreciate the incredible work you've done, and that's really about all I have to say today. John and the team have some really excellent draft materials, and we just really want to hear from you and make sure we're building something that makes sense for everybody.
Just a quick note that Shannon is gonna, I think we just started recording because Mark wasn't able to make it and he wanted to hear how the conversation went, so we're recording it so he is in the loop, and then we can follow up and you guys can follow up with him as makes sense. Just wanted to note that quickly. So can you guys see this? I just wanted to pull up the agenda that Tim sent out just to show you guys where we're headed with the conversation. And this is, a loose plan. If we need to take it a different direction or questions start to come up that we want to just talk through, I think, we can go the direction that we need to have hopefully the most productive conversation possible. But want to quickly hit on kind of key highlights and the overview of everything that's, that we're thinking right now, the timeline that we're trying to hit, and then the key deliverables based on our understanding of what's required along with these funds. And then dig into a couple of draft documents that are intended to outline our current thinking on the plan and how we would administer the funds, and then some of the details in the implementation outline of what we think the contracts will look like, what we think it will likely look like in ETO, and some of those nuts and bolts to give you a sense of where we think we're headed, and talk through to basically talking around these questions here at the bottom. Key flexibility that you guys think we need to be thinking about. Thoughts and concerns on the implementation plan I'm going to walk through here quickly, and then any thoughts or concerns on the proposed allocation and awarding approach. Those are the things I think are key for us to talk about. But again, if other things come up, we can talk about those as well. So with that, I'm just going to kind of dive into the overview piece so that we can hopefully quickly get to less of me talking and more conversation. Real quick, I did want to note we have Ross Gearlock joining us. He is new to our team, and he's going to be working on the WIOA adult program and also helping out with the EcSA program, working with Shannon as we have these additional funds and these additional kind of complications and opportunities to work through. So new face with our group, I just wanted to share. He comes to us from Olympic, and he worked for ESD locally doing implementation of WIOA and other programs as well. So with that, Tim mentioned this, but we have just over $6 million of state funds to contract out to continue and expand local EcSA programs. And this is planned to be an ongoing annual appropriation. These state funds will have a period of performance from July 1 of 22 through June 30 of 23. So within the period of performance for the existing federal EcSA contracts, which go 9 months longer through March of 24. And the purpose of these funds is that with these funds, the intent of EcSA and the primary requirements remain the same. Coordinated customer access to WIOA and non-WIOA partner programs to meet needs and support training. This money is intended to allow local EcSA programs to enroll and serve more participants, connect more participants to training that leads to self-sufficiency, and then obviously move more participants to self-sufficiency as well. A key thing to note is the primary outcome in the budget proviso is tracking attainment of individuals hitting their self-sufficiency target, as opposed to what's currently in our federal contracts, attainment of income at $34,480, which is 200% of FPL for a household of 2. So changing the way that we measure that key outcome. The state funds offer possibly more flexibility than the federal WIOA funds, and so that's one of the key things we do want to talk about today. And to me, the key things are brainstorming with you on the key flexibility needs, and then overviewing the tentative plan that we're thinking about for implementation and getting your feedback. That's what I think are the two goals for today. Some quick notes on the timeline. Because we only have a year to use these funds, I think it's a priority to move as quickly as we can to have contracts in place so you guys can get started July 1 with implementation. And so with that in mind, our key targets I wanted to share with you guys is to have our round 3 documents hopefully finalized by April 29th. So finalizing all the contract documents, which is stuff we're not really going to go into details on today, because I think most of that stuff is going to look similar to your federal contracts with different. Looks like somebody just joined. Hold on 1 second. Oh, I think that was Katie coming back in. Okay. But the implementation outline, or no, sorry, the planning guide document that we're going to walk through is kind of the main one that we're hoping to nail down and finalize, and then the other pieces we're going to walk through today as well. So having those done by April 29th, by May 2nd, having the documents and instructions sent out to each area for completion, and then giving right around 2 weeks. So then May 16th, having those documents submitted back to ESD, and then announcing awards on June 3rd. And at that point, being able to start working from June 3rd through the end of July to hopefully give us plenty of time to, finalize targets, finalize contracts, get them out for execution and all that stuff. So giving us just about a month to have that done. And the details in there, I'm going to walk through in the planning guide that we're going to walk through in a second. Just one more quick note on that I want to hit on the key deliverables is, the intent would be to start spending this money right away because we have the 12 months, hopefully spending half by December so that we can show in a report to the legislature we're spending the funds, we're enrolling the 925 additional households that they're expecting to see with these funds, and having hopefully at least half of those enrolled by December so we have a good report to show that we are making quick progress on this. And then also, connected to that, showing progress toward hitting training targets and hitting outcomes above self-sufficiency, which, generally that takes longer than 6 months, but showing that we're making progress towards that. And this is all so we can serve the customer as well, be well positioned to keep getting this funding and hopefully increasing it over time as makes sense by showing that good performance that we can report to the legislature. So that's my quick overview piece. I was going to dive into these documents, but before I do, I just wanted to see if there's any initial questions before I hop into those.
I guess this is Joy. One of my questions is I've reviewed the documents, so can we expedite that process to get to discussion time?
For sure. I was only planning to walk through a couple highlights on the planning guide, really not hitting the supplemental questions much at all, just you have that for awareness. And then hitting some highlights on the implementation outline, because I want you guys to know what we're thinking there. And that's one we didn't share because it's a rough kind of working document that looks a little goofy. So I did want to hit some stuff on that so you can see where we're thinking.
Okay.
So I'll open the planning guide, which is mainly just to highlight the opportunity, the requirements, and then the plan to award the funds. And let me pull that up real quick. Definitely willing to go fast, Joy. So the priorities we mostly hit continues bundling WIOA and non-WIOA services, priority on SNAP and housing, career plans to self-sufficiency. I think all those we already hit. So I'm just going to skip down because this is the key thing that I haven't talked about yet. Our proposed funding allocation approach is to formula allocate, and I think we did attach an allocation to show you what it would look like. Using the adult PY21 formula percentages and asking for, it says proportionate target increases, but basically looking at what is your cost per in your current contracts and projecting what that would be with the new funding amount and having that as a starting point for discussion. Because the reason we're suggesting that is that would give us a path across the state to get to that 925 number that the legislature is expecting to see. So what we're thinking of is having kind of 3 categories as far as how we allocate this. If you are above 80%, basically give us a new budget, give us your updated targets, and you're pretty much good to go. Just give us a short summary, and we're talking about a couple of sentences of how how you're planning to use the funds to hit these priorities up here. And that's it. So if you're at 80% of spending on, or 80% of spending, 80% of enrollment, 80% of training target is what we're looking at basically, then give us those things and you can move forward. For areas that are below 80% of target, proposing to complete that attached form that we shared for review by the TAC and approval, in addition to submitting your targets and the targets and the budget. One note on that document I did want to highlight is we're not intending to overcomplicate this. It's, filling out this information down here. So there's 4 questions, but the key thing is it's not necessary to complete the entire table. You know, for an area that's only behind in spending, you know, explaining that as your response, and that's probably how you're planning to get caught up on spending. Just as an example, we're not intending to overcomplicate things. And then the third category is for any area that didn't participate in round 1 or round 2, submitting an initial implementation plan and proposal. And you know, just at this point, that's only Pack Mountain because they don't currently have a contract. So we just created a separate category for them to update and submit an updated version of the plan that they've been working on. I'll not go through all of these other than to say the key question here is still eligibility requirements is one of them. I think we're going to have below 200% of FPL, but outside of that, it is an open question that comes with opportunities, but also risks. The rest of this is just highlighting what the EcSA requirements already are. Last thing I want to highlight is these 2 things are the key new things I want to make sure you guys are aware of. One is we're going to be required to, in addition to what we currently do, which is establish the self-sufficiency target using the UW calculator, the case manager would have to hit save on that so that it would store it in the system, and then they would have to go in at exit and enter outcome information so that system can track whether or not they attain their self-sufficiency target. So that's a new piece that we haven't required before that we believe we have to do now because of what the legislature has tasked us with in the reporting requirements. And we have kind of a plan for doing that I want to share in a little bit. The other thing is tracking spending by service category. They're requiring us to do that, and we have a piece of that in the implementation outline I want to show. We're basically bucketing it in, career services, training services, support services, and a couple of others. And want to walk through that in the implementation outline. So that's it on the planning guide. I want to just stop for a second to see if there's any questions on that, and then I can just dive right into some highlights on the implementation outline, and then we'll get right into discussion.
Hey, John, I do have a quick question on the new requirements, the first bullet. I was just typing it into chat, but I thought I'd ask since you out there. So it says through completion. So it says to track, wherever was that? You said that we have to maintain that self-sufficiency wage goal and track the progress through program completion. So do we have to hang on to them for the whole year? So my question is, if we find someone first quarter, they achieve that self-sufficiency wage, and then we exit them, does that mean we provide follow-up through the end of June, or what does that mean?
We're not meaning to indicate that either way in this. So I'm going to highlight the language to make sure that we look at how we should clear that up. Really, Amy, it means at intake, when you're doing the assessments and creating the career plan, you're capturing the target, and then whenever exit happens, okay. If it's 2 months or 6 months, the case manager is going in and putting the outcome, whether that is they hit the target or not.
Perfect. I just want to clarify that because just so we know. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions on this one before I hop into the other document? All right. So there's a lot of stuff in here I'm not going to hit on. I just wanted to, this is a document we've been using with our internal partners, policy monitoring and others, the data folks, to try to come to clarity on the nuts and bolts behind this, to hopefully try to make this as simple as possible. Quick notes on the contracts. We're basically planning to do a statement of work that would mimic your existing statement of work, and budget and performance templates. So the documents would look basically the same. We would just have the new targets, new terms and conditions, and the language that pertains to state funds as opposed to federal funds. And along with that, to me, it makes sense for us to amend your existing contract so that we don't have, 2 different key outcomes for basically the same program for each of the funding streams, so that one funding stream is going to 34,480, one funding stream is going to self-sufficiency attainment. That seems, pretty complicated to operationalize. So that's something I think we should be thinking about as well. I'm going to skip through most of this. The key thing I did want to highlight is the expectation here is, so if you have 30 individuals or 30 participants as your target for enrollment in your federal contract, and then you had 30 in the state contract, that would mean that locally your EcSA program should serve 60 individuals. They could all be co-enrolled, it's kind of agnostic to that, but that the total would be the unique 60 individuals, whether they are co-enrolled or not. I just wanted to highlight that piece. Let's skip past this because this will be a part of our conversation. Targets have already hit on. So for fiscal reporting, just real quick, what we're thinking is a kind of a version of the 9130, just to keep it something that your teams are already used to filling out, but having a column for each of these. So there'd be a column for PY20, a column for PY21 for the federal, and then a column for EcSA state, and having them be, for the most part, the same in the sense that capturing these may not be the specific categories we need, but some version of these categories under each of the funding streams to make sure that we're hitting the intent of what the legislature is asking. And then narrative performance, looking at should we have a combined report or not. That's something that we're open to what would make sense to you all, but either having a combined report or two separate reports that are fairly similar documents. To me, it makes sense to kind of combine them into one document. So I think these are the last two things I'll hit on, and then we'll get right into conversation. For ETO, it's looking like we have a lot of questions to dig into with the data integrity folks around implications to Pearl reporting. But where I think we're landing is having to have a new program of enrollment for EcSA for the state funds to make sure that it's clearly separated, and that all participants, using these funds would need to be enrolled in this program of enrollment. They could be co-enrolled in both. They could be co-enrolled in formula, but no requirements there, but encouraged as makes sense. And one thing to note on that is if we do allow for more flexible eligibility outside of WIOA, WIOA eligible folks will have to think about what the complexities are there. So that's something that our team is looking at. Okay, looking for other things to highlight. I'll move down to the UW calculator. This, because we know this is a new lift, and there's probably going to be some frustration around this. We've been connecting with Sea-King to figure out what the support needs to be. So we are planning to contract with Sea-King with other funds, not these state funds, to provide ongoing technical assistance. So training on the front end, how to use the tool. Folks that are going to work, they want us to identify a point of contact in each area as we move forward. For them to work with, so that they can be in ongoing contact, help support, making sure the reporting is happening accurately, and we're able to capture it and share it as needed. So they would be providing assistance to each area on that piece. Also providing funding to update the tool. We've heard from some areas some concerns around mainly the cost of housing not necessarily being accurate and some other things like that. So they will also be working with UW to update the tool, I think at the beginning of 23. As part of this as well. So interested in your thoughts on that, but we are planning a general direction around that. And then already hit the timeline, and this is just notes on things that we've been talking about for ETO guidance, so or ETO and other technical guidance and that kind of stuff. So I will leave it at that to make sure we can just move into discussion. Any questions on that? I guess before we do, just any of those details I walked through, I guess I should make space for that first.
John, this is Lisa from North Central. I tried to chime in earlier, but I hit leave the meeting instead of the microphone. Sorry. I just want to, I think I've talked to you about this before. The whole self-sufficiency calculator out here in North Central is an issue. We don't find it valuable at all. And I don't have the details on it, that Emily can give those to you. I know it's a requirement, so I'm glad to see that there is going to be some training and some real deep dive on the efficacy and I think it out here, it not confuses, but it is not a good tool for the participants. It doesn't help them see what real self-sufficiency looks like. And our folks, every one of our EcSA participants gets a private session with a certified financial counselor. And so that we find more valuable than the self-sufficiency calculator. I'm hoping to see it improved for, the data out in our area, but I just wanted to reiterate that it's one of those things that they do, but I think it confuses the customer more than it helps. So hopefully that gets cleared up.
Yeah, I remember our conversations on that, Lisa, and you're not the only one who's raised that. And we did follow up and talk to Emily, and we've gone back and forth with the Seeking folks on a couple of things. And it seems like there's a combination of things. It's in part, I think, a training issue, helping staff understand how Seeking has used it. And I think there is an effective way in most areas to use it, but there are also, I think, issues with the data, and it's showing really low targets in areas that just aren't reasonable, especially in some rural areas. And so I think there are some technical problems as well. But that's why I am hoping that some of the technical assistance around how staff use it to look at the standard itself, but then also it shows on that other side some customized stuff based on the conversation and how they talk through with the participant, where they can establish an individualized target that is outside of and different than the standard that is more reasonable based on their specific needs. And to me, there's I think kind of two sets of issues. One is households of one are generally looking much lower than what we would want them to shoot for as a target. But then like a household of 6 that might have multiple earners is going to have a possibly unreasonably high target that they're not going to be able to hit unless we're able to realistically factor in multiple earners in one household. And those are the conversations we're having with Seeking right now about those two issues and framing how we can do some training on those things. But I don't mean to say it's perfect. I've heard some complaints. So not trying to gloss over that.
Right, I appreciate that. And I would love to see a great tool like this, but it's just not working for us. So I appreciate the focus on improvement.
Well, and I think, Lisa, to your point and to a broader point, I would love to just bluntly ask, like, what's different and what is more flexible around these funds than the last 2 rounds? To this point, I mean, Tim, you and I have talked a ton. I talked to Dan a ton. I went back to my colleagues and promised a co-design process around this, and that's not what this feels like. And so I'm curious about more details just around what that local flexibility looks like and how we can really use this to streamline and improve systems, as opposed to sort of kind of repeating a siloed program that we've been implementing for the last 2 years.
And can I just briefly add on top of that, Katie, I thank you for that. And I want to add that the form for those that are 80% expended is actually punitive for those that have taken a systems approach and are not meeting target, because we were very clear about our approach being a system transformation and one of integration, and now we're being penalized. And quite frankly, the form to be completed in that area is very much out of touch with what Katie said and what my understanding was of these funds. Like it's not at all symbolic of representing that system transformation, that local flexibility, and the goals that many have articulated in their program. So I agree. I'm not seeing the flexibility outside of the reduction of the elimination of the specificity around that 34,000.
And I see Amy's hand, and I want to add to that. And I know, Joy, we've all talked, like, we're really excited about this. And I think we had so much fun pre-brainstorming just about what we can do together. And so that, like, I enter this with a lens of excitement and opportunity, certainly not begrudging in any way. So that's just a side note. I see your hand, Amy. Sorry.
No, that's totally great. Yeah, I would agree with what you said, but I want to talk real quick about contracting. Please do not put this in our contract. Currently, we have 2 funding sources to track currently and putting a state contract and dollars in with a federal causes issues when state auditors look at it. So, or an auditor, because it's federal requirements, and if we're more flexible, it just causes problems locally. So we would like you not to put that, at least that's for me, it's just another tracking mechanism in that. So we would like a separate contract.
We're definitely not putting them in the same contract, Amy.
Okay.
That is a hard no. We've gotten that from everybody. Loud and clear.
Good, perfect. I keep raising my hand and I'm trying not to, so stop it. That's there. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll apologize and just say
I
I echo what Katie says. There's so much enthusiasm going into this, and then all of a sudden, like, we're not having a conversation. And I know you want to expedite, and there's a timeline, and I appreciate that. But how do we how do we go? How do we move from here? Tim, sorry, I'll contain my COVID crankiness and let you speak. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's very much our intention to have a co-design process. You know, what John just did is kind of lay out where our early thinking is on it. There are some things like, you know, we do want to get the money spent rapidly so that we have a good shot at keeping the money next year. We want to make sure we're serving people so that we have a good shot at keeping the money next year. But really, it's not just about keeping the money, right? It's about you know, reaching out and serving those people. You know, those are just, you know, some of the goals that are required of us, and also that I think we all share. And you're right, like, you know, these documents are our best thinking at this point, and we had time to like think about them together and discuss them together and put some drafts out in front of you. But that wasn't intended to be like, here's what we're doing and slam it through. That's not what we're looking at all. We do have some aspects that we really do need to be able to deliver on. But the whole idea is to, you know, open up creativity locally. And we have seen already models like your model, Joy, is very, very different than a lot of other areas. A lot of other areas have completely unique models, and then some have some that look kind of similar. And that's what we want. We want to see what locally works best, right? And over years, figure out, okay, these models are really working well. Let's all kind of focus in on the things that are working, but it's like a laboratory, it's an experiment, and we very much want that that degree of certainly of co-design among ourselves, but also during implementation, having that ability to go your own way.
Well, and I guess just to be, I think perspective from the ground, right, is our system's overwhelmed with adult enrollments right now, that will benefit from an expansion of EcSA. And so just to be clear, like I hear people coming in, this is what I want EcSA to address in Snohomish County, is I hear from families that are saying, our family is broken. We need help now. And so I say, okay, well, it's a 6 to 8 week process. We're going to go ahead and sit you down. We're going to run you through a self-sufficiency calculator. We're going to do all these things. We're going to get you in WIO enrolled. Like, I'm trying to deal with the mechanics of expeditiousness with my partners and our pending subrecipients, and really understanding how do we mobilize to address families that are in absolute crisis, right? And not crisis of mental health or they need housing. Yes, some of them need housing stability, that we're triaging, but it's the work, it's the engagement, it's the hope, Tim. They need us to be there to give them hope and a vision of what's possible and to get them on that path. And so I want EcSA to help me do that. That's what I want.
Joy, that's what we want to. It really is. You know, what one thought jumps to mind for me, and it's one I've shared with others before too, but it is state funding. And so the ability to provide supportive services faster and easier, or even the ability to do more of a TAA model and provide housing and living stipend kind of approach. Those things are not very easy. Well, supportive services are, but the latter example is not really easy to do or allowed under WIOA funding. So that's one example where, you know, if you have people saying, I'm about to lose my home, I need to make my rent payment, and that's going to throw everything off track. You know, you've got a lot more flexibility with state funds, in my opinion, than you would with WIOA funds. That's just one example, though. Bottom line, you know, as long as, you know, we are moving people from below 200% to above their self-sufficiency target, you know, we just want to let let you guys go crazy. And I mean, not go crazy, right? Because that's not the responsible terminology, but we want to give you a ton of flexibility to find ways to do that, that fit your community.
Sorry, John, Miriam, have your hands up. I'll
Yeah.
quiet.
I think
my
Miriam
voice.
was next, so I'll let her go. Go ahead.
Thanks. So a couple things. I'd love to hear just to your point, Tim, you just said that there's a couple outcomes that are set in stone to ensure that we're successful with this funding stream. We want to all be successful. I really appreciate the leadership and advocacy to get these dollars. And so how can we make sure that we're all, successful in getting the outcomes that we essentially pitched on the front end? So what are those that are set in stone? What are the things that we can be creative on? And then I would say, try to be, as try not to be prescriptive, I think, in the contracts, and just have those like very specific targets. I like the idea of stipends. I love the idea of rethinking supportive services, acknowledging that, we have like a 6K cost per, really, if you look at the dollars and the amount of people to be served ish, a little more, 6,400, a little more closely, but I think, it's going to mean that we do have to co-enroll across programs. It's going to mean that we do have to have WEO eligibility, because we are going to have to co-enroll to meet those outcomes. And so I just want to be clear in terms on the program side, in order to meet those outcomes, if we are going to have higher level stipends, higher level cost pers for support services, we're going to have to co-enroll to meet those outcomes across our WEO funds, which then means that folks will have to be WEO eligible, which then means citizenship status, all those things it's kind of already decided with the cost per. So unless there's like a low, person that comes in that just needs a very basic level of services, and that could happen. But what we're seeing is the need is very high, to Joy's point, to get folks into true self-sufficiency. So I think just keeping all those things in mind, just to be realistic. One idea that I think would be helpful, and in terms of a systems approach, would be a common referral system across state agencies. And that is not something that is direct participant cost. That is a system level state agency training and onboarding of a new technology. And I think that could be really helpful for customers and also our system level partners. And it would make it easier to bring other CBOs on after the fact if we were able to get like DSHS and ESD programming specifically on there. So that's just one thing I would be interested in. And I don't know if there's maybe we carve off, and I don't know if my colleagues are going to like this idea, but maybe we carve off some of that 6 million that's specific to a common referral system. And that then of course would mean that we'd have to co-enroll across our WEO funds to meet those outcomes. But I would love to see some of those system level changes with these dollars. I think that'll lead to higher levels of success in the future too, if we get these funds again. So that's all I'll add.
Can I just, to Miriam's point, and I would just say many of us have things like that are working at the local level. So I hearted that, and then I got very scared of like, oh my gosh, another WIT 2-year like system procurement. But like, I don't think that's what Miriam's talking about.
No.
I wonder what we can learn from local areas, and if we have systems that are already working, can we invest in those, etc. But just want to amplify that idea of systems investment. Miriam. Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. I know that y'all have the 211 and system, and I think that's a success. There's one that through Kaiser Permanente called Unite Washington that is of interest. But I think what we need is the state level leadership saying this is allowable. This is something that y'all can do. Actually, this is something that you need to do and use as a tool. That is what is necessary to get those tools to be actually helpful across the agencies locally.
Yeah, I agree. I think Unite Us is a great platform and HIPAA compliant, and really we're moving forward with a full implementation in Snohomish County. But the systems, the integration, that's where we're going to get the outcomes, Tim, is really not looking at this as a specific target or population. It is really looking at the broader, ability to, with the investment of state funds coupled with braided resources across agencies and organizations is that's how we're going to meet these metrics. That's how we're getting traction in serving the hardest to serve and those that, yes, there's many basic services folks, but that's not who we're going after. And that's not easy work. And so I think we'll get there. And quite frankly, the need is overwhelming. Also note that rental assistance is expiring across the board. And so we are now getting a huge increase in inquiries. And so it's a bit of a Pandora's box to open up some of those. Yeah, it requires closer coordination with agencies and organizations that have those housing and aid programs, because that 6,000 per, we're looking at like, well, we need that to train and provide other supportive services. But yeah, I agree. Katie,
John,
you're spot on. Yeah. I
John, I
think
see-
that we should study it in this year and really look at how that's working locally, and share best practices.
John, I see your hand. I just wanted to
Yeah, sorry, John.
point out really
Respect.
quickly though that this particular funding, I mean, it is expected, by OFM and the legislature to result in a number of people moving out of poverty, right? So that's a part of this that's really not flexible. However, at the moment, I'm not sure why we couldn't use WIOA funding or go in together and ask for additional governor's discretionary funding, or just write a letter to DOL and ask them for permission to use WIOA funding this way. I think there are aspects within the WIOA law that lets us use WIOA funding for that kind of systems reform. And there was also interest. I had just a couple opening conversations in DC with some of the federal folks, but there was interest in helping us. They like this idea, and we very much want to identify where the federal barriers are with you and ask for federal flexibility. Now that one sounds like that might take some time, and I think that's right, it would. But if we want to do systems work and say, let's build a common referral system, heck yes. I just don't think we can use this particular pot of money for it because we didn't talk about that with them when we were developing it. But it'd be incredibly helpful, and I think we could get permission to use WIOA or else talk to the governor's office or find some other source. And I hope that's helpful. And John, I do see you've got your hand.
Yeah, well, I was wanting to respond a while ago to Miriam's basic ask, but I think you hit most of it. You just said this, but we have to hit 925-ish individuals served with these funds. We have to serve low-income folks. We have to use the self-sufficiency calculator. Outside of that stuff, I think we are intending to allow some of the flexibility that you guys are asking for. At least in my mind, it's something that Tim just said. Made me question if I'm understanding correctly, but. I believe the intention would be that as long as we are serving those folks through co-enrollment or in whatever way makes sense, that these funds could possibly be used for ways to improve the partnership at a broader strategic level in local areas, like with things like the 211 system in Tacoma. I think what Miriam is saying about a bigger state system is probably a bigger lift over a longer period of time, but I do think the intention here would be for us to have some flexibility in these funds so that you guys could do some of that kind of stuff as well, as long as we are still, at the end of the day, serving folks through co-enrollment or through whatever resources make sense to hit those outcomes as well. So I think, I'm excited about this conversation, and I think a lot of us are generally on the same page with how we think these funds should be used. And looking back, I think it's kind of a mistake for me to come at you with these fully baked documents because it doesn't give that impression at all. And I wish I had approached it differently on that, because I think we are mostly on the same page. I was just trying to dive to what does the structure have to look like, because that's where I always want to go.
Thanks, John. So appreciate that. And I think that if we can really look at, none of us are going to say we don't want to be accountable and that we don't want to support this underlying objective of meeting the 925 or exceeding it. I think we're fortunate and unfortunate in this fact that conditions on the ground are changing rapidly. and that the demand for these types of dollars and others are exponential. So I have no doubt that we are all committed to making this happen and ensuring that the legislature continues to fund this year over year, and hopefully expands this work. So with that said, I think going back to Sunrun, what are the absolute requirements for putting in these documents, right? And living in that space. And, I'm more, my colleagues know I'm, across the state, right, Miriam? Yeah. My colleagues know I'm one of the ones that is under the 80% threshold. We're transparent and have a discussion. And I think in relation to the formula allocation, there's some pretty strong language in these documents that I highly recommend removing, because around the technical advisory group suggests not accepting the funds. I think that's simply unacceptable. I I will absolutely accept the funds, but I also want to go back to my partners and have the ability to say, based on our discussions, based on the pipeline we're seeing, how much can we reasonably expect to expend, knowing that we're expanding this program? And I'd like to have the ability and the local flexibility to have that conversation. So I can say, maybe it's not 500,000, et cetera. Maybe we better live in the 400,000 or the 350 and not be, and be able to have that discussion. And so that's one of my requests. And I, think I have more than 9 days to do that, given that I'm, anyway, just a heads up on that. But also really thinking about the document you've provided. I'm more than willing to use that document, but my response is going to be drawing lines through things and kind of articulating outside of that framework. So I'm happy to use that framework, but really knowing that the work on the ground is evolving past that original template. And so really thinking about how we use that template to justify that our next step, when it's still very much in a box and reflective of the first allocation.
I'll jump
Versus,
in really quick. I appreciate that, Joy. I agree with everything that you mentioned. In terms of, so I'm thinking about eligibility. In Southwest Washington, we have a really high population of folks who are undocumented. I know that's a trend across the state, and we can't serve them with any of our funds to date. However, I'm thinking, so if it's enrollments this next year, and this is very programmatic, but this is kind of where my mind goes and like how we could make this work. If we had a certain percentage in Southwest of those that, that citizenship would not count towards eligibility, it would be really important then to have funding for those folks post this year, especially if we don't place them, because then there'd be no other funding stream to catch them after this year. And so I'm just putting that out there too. That would be of interest to Southwest to serve a certain percentage of folks that are not documented, or at least just not require that paperwork on the front end. And maybe catch those that aren't documented after we figure it out through case management. Maybe it's not something that's on the front end of case management, but it's not likely that could be even an option unless we have this understanding that there'd be additional funds next year to continue to serve them. I see a thumbs up. Okay.
And this is intended as an annual appropriation.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
the funds
Okay.
are continuing.
Okay, awesome. It seemed on the front end that was still in question based on our performance this year. So just to clarify that. Cool.
Yeah,
real quick insertion here. Exactly right. And the legislature passes 2-year budgets, right? So if somebody comes in and says, we got to get rid of EcSA, I don't think it's likely, but they can. But yeah, we are assumed in next year's budget, which is kind of a big deal because that means we're in unless somebody cuts us, right? We'll be in the maintenance budget.
No, sorry. I was just gonna say, that's something, Miriam, we're looking at something similar. We don't have a large portion of that are not eligible, but we do have some that are not legally entitled to work in the US. And certain circumstances. And we're looking at those as well as some of our population that is not self-sufficient. Self-sufficient calculator works well here. We've been using it for a long time. And it's our 4th priority, by the way. So we've used it for a long time. We're looking at those that are not at that self-sufficiency wage and then getting them in. We don't typically enroll them when they're closer to that 4th priority for us. We usually do that 2nd priority that is very low income, are on TANF. So we're looking at some of those middle folks that we would enroll and get in, get out, and then also get in with and make some gains, and then sometime next year up with hopefully the next funding roll in and exit them then. But that's how we're looking at it, and doing some silos in just this EcSA round 3 and not enroll them in WIOA. That's what we're looking at for some of those, so that we can be more flexible with that eligibility. Right now, we will see what really happens, but that's what we're thinking.
Yeah, and I know we're only scheduled until 8:50, so I just want to say this is a big deal, and I've loved every minute of the conversation around co-design and throwing out ideas. It's a big deal, Tim. Thank you for your advocacy around this, especially if it's something that we anticipate will continue and potentially grow. And so from Pierce County, we will spend this money fast, is what I will say to you, so that we can get more. And I'm grateful for the space to really think critically about this in partnership. That feels fresh and exciting.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you both so much.
Katie.
That is our main intent. Like, I just want to be super clear about that. You know, within certain parameters that we really don't have much control over, we very much want to just allow you to do your work locally. And you've already proven that you're able to do this. What's really exciting for me is I think we're going to find better mousetraps that have never existed, and that in fact reduce poverty, and or at least, you know, move people out of poverty more effectively. That's huge. So yeah, I'm really thrilled about this, and I love this partnership.
Lisa, I see your hand. I want to make sure you have a chance to be heard.
Thanks, Joy. Yeah, I just want to echo everybody. This is a great conversation, and I think we could continue talking for a good long time. My question is, I know there's another meeting today at 11:30, almost the same exact agenda with the same tools, with some of the same people and some different people. So I'm a little, would like to hear a little more about the intent of that meeting. Is it more of the same, just with a different group? And or could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Lisa, we were wanting to hear directly from the EcSA program staff in each area, just to get their input too, similar to you guys, just to make sure we're not missing any perspectives.
Okay,
So
great.
basically having the same conversation, and you know, a lot of the impact will be, or a lot of the responses will probably be the same, but there might be some other stuff that we might have missed. So that was our intent.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to see.
Yeah, sorry.
I just want to. Should we schedule another time to chat next week to
Yes.
specifically focus on the, you know, I think the allowability pieces, because I think you've given us some stuff to think about. We could maybe clean some stuff up, maybe, because we're working with our policy team to draft, you know, start drafting what the guidance might look like, what the things we want to cover. And I think one of those pieces is clearly what's allowable, what's not. And I think that's a key piece that we should probably draft an outline with based on this conversation and come back to you guys with a focus on eligibility as one piece. And I heard some of that, the systems level stuff around common referral system as another piece to think about. And then stipends, I think, are the 3 that I've heard so far. And so thinking about what our language around that might look like, and then having a more kind of detailed conversation from there once we circle back next week.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I have one request, given that there's a parallel meeting going on with many of our staff, is that if there is anything that is raised from that conversation that was not discussed here or greatly different, that you circle back around to this group, because I will say I appreciate the spirit of that engagement. It's a little, it feels, it doesn't, I'm not entirely comfortable with a parallel meeting versus bringing us all together and having our staff. And I mean, it's just very odd. Like I won't even have a chance to speak with my staff before that meeting. So it's if there is anything that
But-
flags or is greatly different from this conversation, brilliant or otherwise, I would hope that there would be some follow-up so that we can make sure that we're looking at it holistically.
Yeah, I wonder if we should consider canceling that meeting and moving it out next week after we've had time to reconnect, and that would give you guys the opportunity to connect directly with your staff and have internal conversations. If maybe that is the better approach at this point.
I would love that. And
Me
I would
too.
also say, I think that it's a sort of a new day around the way most of us lead in WWA. I don't want to speak for everyone, but I would love to be in the space with my staff.
Right.
So the next time we meet, like
Yes.
if we could, it could be us and our SMEs. That's a really powerful idea generating space from my perspective.
So
Agreed.
should we
Agreed.
schedule next time, the same time next week, and include your EcSA program managers as well for our follow-up meeting?
I love that idea. And I certainly, I support it. And it gives, I mean, if the workforce board wasn't occurring in a few minutes, like this would be, more of us could be present and engaged in that conversation. But if we could cancel and reschedule for next week holistically, I support that.
That sounds
And
good to me.
appreciate it.
Look at all these hearts and love that we've got between our,
Yeah.
our ESG and our boards. This is wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. You guys are great, and I appreciate all that you've done to get us to this point. And it just is an overwhelming responsibility and opportunity to make transformation in our communities. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate the conversation, and we'll talk to you all next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Likewise.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.